Ladies and gentlemen, we are live right here on the Chase's Sports News YouTube channel. I'm alongside two Fairfield Stags experts. They're going to be broadcasting the game courtside tomorrow from Lexington, Kentucky, between the Fairfield Stags and the Kansas State Wildcats. To my right, to the right of your screen, Andrew Jamieson, and to the left, Logan Runde. Guys, thank you so much for joining me and taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Be sure to check out WVOF Sports tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. If you guys can't tune in there, obviously you can go to ESPN News where the game will be broadcasted. What a game this is. Real quick, let's start off. Do you think Fairfield was given a bad draw by the committee? I think when you have a 28-4 season, when you have an out-of-conference resume, that's pretty decent for a school like Fairfield, and then you go 19-1 and pretty much run the floor with your conference. Coach Carly was mentioning it. I think Fairfield could have been an 11. I think they could have deserved an 11, or certainly not play a team like Kansas State that's so elite as we're going to break down.
Yeah, I'll take so. I think you nailed it. Kansas State, we were talking about. Obviously, we'll get to Aoka Lee and what a player she is, 6'6", AP honorable mention. But yeah, I feel if Kansas State was healthy the entire year, they more likely than not are a 2 or a 3 seed. With her, they were 18-1, I believe. And since then, after she's been injured, or she had a foot injury, came back, and then she re-aggravated that foot fracture that she had. So she hasn't seen court action since, I believe, February 22nd.
But, month.
Yeah. So, but we were talking. I looked at the post presser, kind of like the script of it today. She feels as good as she has been since then. She's 100%. But yeah, this draw is definitely one of the more competitive regionals in all of the NCAA women's tournament. I mean,
you got USC and UConn, obviously, and then in this particular in Lexington, obviously, you have Kansas State and Kentucky. It is a hard region.
Real challenge. Yeah, it's a challenging region, and two high-powered offenses and two high-powered conferences in the Big 12 and the SEC. And we were talking about earlier this week that they got size. That is Kansas State's big advantage. They have size. Most of their players are a lot taller than ours. However, if you look at kind of the deeper stats, the shooting percentages are relatively the same. So I always said, I've been saying it all week, if Fairfield can shoot over 50%, I think they win the game. Now they have to defend at a clip where it's extremely high as well. You have to force the three-point ball. We were just talking to Coach Carly in the press conference about an hour ago, and she was talking about how they're big inside, and so they can beat you in the post. But they're also an excellent three-point shooting team as well. And they average 79 points a game, which is one of the best in the country, and it leads the Big 12. So there's a lot of things to look at. It's not just size versus, our smaller stature, but I think this is going to be a more competitive game than people think it is.
What I find interesting is there's a stat ESPN put as like upsets to watch in the women's bracket in the NCAA tournament, obviously putting Fairfield on there after their season. It talked about, Andrew, what you were just mentioning, how they went 18-1 with Lee, 7-6 without her. You talked about kind of re-aggravating an injury, came back for one game in February, but really hasn't been healthy since essentially the turn of the new year. And as you mentioned, she is expected to return. She seems great. Obviously, that'll be a challenge. Logan, as you were talking about the height, just Fairfield have anyone to guard her. But something else I found interesting here is they talked about how Fairfield makes 8.9 3-pointers per game. KSU makes 8.5. They said if Fairfield could widen that gap, that's where they win. Not only do they have to shoot efficiently, but they have to widen the gap, I believe, of just how many more three-pointers are making than Kansas State. That's something Fairfield did really well in conference play this year. They're 5th in the country in three-point make differential in a game. So I think that that's your avenue to get through. But to me, you also have to look at, as great as Fairfield played against Quinnipiac, and as much as you want to believe that is how they're going to play, if they come out playing the way they did against Mount St. Mary's and Manhattan, Kansas State, I think, is just too powerful on both ends, and they're going to cruise by. So I think if you're Fairfield, you got to come out firing to begin with to at least make sure that gap is never generated. And then if they're able to beat you down the stretch, tip your cap. That's an incredible basketball team. One who, Andrew, you were talking about, if they were healthy, would not have gotten a 5th seed. I'm looking at the net rating here for all teams in the country. They were 9th. So you're playing a very good basketball team. If they're able to close it out because they have that experience, they know what to do in these scenarios, tip your cap. That's a great basketball team you're playing on the other side. But if you're Fairfield, you have to make sure that gap is never created. That 17.5-point gap that ESPN and betting models are projecting, you have to make sure that gap is never created if you want a chance down the stretch.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Kansas State's offense. Big 12 is one of the best conferences in the country. There were 5 teams ranked in the top 20. We played Oklahoma State, and the strength of schedule does bode well for us compared to last year, but this is a tall task when you look at it. You mentioned the 3-point efficiency. Kansas State's offense is relentless. Even without Aoka Lee, they shot 38.8% from three. That's third in Division I. Furthermore, they're 48.9% from the field. That's fourth. And then, this is just kind of to show the nature that they play. The assist mark, they averaged 21.4. Fairfield, great on the other hand, still 17.7. Don't take anything away from them, but second in the nation in passing per game. So really, the offense for Kansas State is so relentless. And you mentioned Fairfield, the starts against Manhattan, the start against Mount St. Mary's, and it wasn't really until that second and third quarter in that game versus Quinnipiac that Fairfield took off. Let's forget, this was a 15-15 game in the end of the first quarter in Atlantic City just almost a week ago now. And,
right.
Sydney Scott, more likely than not, will not likely shoot 6 of 6 again. It is hard to shoot threes at an elite level.
Everything just went their way. Like Anderson was 6 for 9, Scott was 6 for 6. Lamoureux at times is inconsistent shooting wise, but she really got it going offensively. Everything Fairfield needed to go their way in that championship game, it did go their way, which obviously preparation is a key part of that. But you got to think, you can't expect them to shoot the way they did against Quinnipiac. You can't expect them to do that again against Kansas State. And I think, Andrew, once you wrap up too, the question for Logan will be, if Fairfield doesn't shoot that way, where does the hope lie?
Well, the hope lies in the rebounding battle. You have to be able to control the glass. It's something they've struggled with all year, and you have to turn that into a strength of some sort. They're going to score points. Aoka Lee is going to get her points. It's just going to happen. And so on the other side of things, you have to win where you can and where luck can kind of provide you a little bit of a momentum in some way. The ball bounces off rims in weird ways. You just have to hustle more. You got to be the team that's more energetic. And let me tell you, this is not an easy, win for Kansas State. Fairfield's going to put up a bunch of different challenges. One of them, they're not going to shoot as efficient from three-point land. They shot over 50% in that championship game. It's not happening again. Kansas State's just too tall. They're too athletic. So you have to be able to move the basketball. Against Mount St. Mary's, against Manhattan, they just didn't do it. And when I was talking to Coach Blake Dudonis on Monday, he was like, Quinnipiac, in that Quinnipiac game, that was Fairfield basketball. You moved the ball, you shot well from three-pointer, you ran the floor, and you won the game, right? By a convincing margin too, So in my mind, if they can run the floor, control the pace of the game, rebound the basketball, and move it at an effective rate, Kansas State's going to have a lot of trouble, especially because they are a little bit taller and not as mobile as Fairfield tends to be.
And, Aoka Lee, she feels as great as she has been at 100%. However, these types of injuries, like a foot fracture and those types of injuries, they don't go. She has been working. The workouts have gotten more intense as the time has gone on. However, Coach Timmy, based off what I read, we don't know what to expect in terms of minutes. So if you're Fairfield, you have to look at any advantage you can take, in all honesty, because, that's a 66% shooter from the floor who averages 16 per game, 6 rebounds. But again, this team is just full of weapons. We haven't even mentioned Serena Sundell, who is averaging 14 points per game, second team all Big 12. And
second in the country in assists.
Exactly.
She's excellent. I think, and the final thing I'll say before I have to head out to practice is one of the best things that Kansas State can do is they space the floor at an elite level. Fairfield has to be able to front Aoka Lee and all of their other forwards, and you have to be able to deny their guards. If they get any type of separation, Aoka Lee is such a smart basketball player that she'll actually set flare screens, she'll set ghost screens, she'll be able to block out and create lanes of separation. You're going to have to find different ways to win on the perimeter. And I think that's, if we were to win this game, that's what we're going to come back and look at. And I appreciate you guys, having me on the show. I'm going to head out back to practice, and hopefully I can give you guys some more information going forward.
Logan, thank you so much. Again, be sure, we're still going to talk with Andrew, but again, be sure to check out Logan when he's on courtside tomorrow broadcasting the game on WVOF Sports. Logan, you're the best, man. We appreciate you. Best of luck in the journey.
Chase, you're the best, man. Appreciate you having me on.
I'm gonna keep that computer because mine won't die.
Awesome.
Chase, man.
Fantastic. You know what, Andrew? I'm actually going to take off your camera here if you want to switch over. There honestly might be easier. Obviously,
Love you,
technically
brother.
there.
I'll see you, buddy.
All right,
Awesome,
we're all
man.
good.
Take care.
All right, let's continue.
Let's talk. I think that the other underlying element here is you got to think Fairfield, and I know it sounds cliche, you got to think they're going to want it more. Like, yes, Kansas State is a team that wants to contend for a national championship, but the one thing I've always loved about Fairfield, they've always fought for that extra ball. Like, it just feels like it's a hard-working, grinded-out basketball team. And the coaching staff displays that. Like, you talk to Coach Carly, that's something that she loves about this team and their resiliency. So I think that the underlying element here is, do you think, in terms of physicality, Fairfield, they've been able to play that type of basketball for so long against MAC teams? Are you going to be able to do that against the Big 12 team, the 9th team in net rating across the entire country in Kansas State? I'm kind of wondering your thoughts there, because I think that's a whole other element that goes in outside of the X's and O's.
And you're right. The MAC is obviously no SEC, no Big 12. Yes, the point differential might still be the same, but the MAC doesn't have the 6'6" Aoka Lee. They don't have the Haley Van Liths. They don't have the Sedona Price. And I think one thing that does bode in favor of Fairfield, though, is the experience. We keep Coach Carly, the presser that me and Logan just got off of, 33 is the number that they keep on referencing. And I don't know if you know what 33 means.
Yeah, it was a 33-point loss to Indiana last year in the NCAA tournament. Actually, Andrew, not to cut you off, for the audience, when I was in the MAC tournament in Atlantic City, I asked Coach Carly about what the win in the championship meant for the program. She mentioned this number 33, how that number is kind of they use as a sense of motivation to want to get back here and want to try to win a game in the NCAA tournament. So, Andrew, not to cut you off, but those are the origin stories about 33 after losing by 33 last year to Indiana.
No, you're all good. And, the other thing about that number is its experience. The Stags have been here before. The one obvious main thing that people, I don't know if we've touched upon yet, is this is a neutral court game. Last year, it was brand new for everybody at Indiana. Indiana, obviously one of the cathedrals in college basketball.
Sure.
And, 18,000 strong, basically all against Fairfield. They're all Indiana. They're all decked out in their Hoosier gear. And they came to play, but we were only down 4 at halftime. The score was 38-34. And, with the hot shooting teams like the Indianas and the Kansas State this year, it's only a matter of time before they get going. And, this team, in a sense, does have a chip on their shoulder to some degree because, yes, we have solidified ourselves in the MAC as one of the prolific and premier mid-majors in the country, but this team, the staff wants more. They
don't want to be a mid-major. Coach Carly said it after they beat Quinnipiac. She and her staff, they want to build this team into a national championship contender down the line. They want to make Fairfield a dominant program to where they're the 5 seed one day. They're the team getting home games in the NCAA tournament.
And you can see that from every person in the locker room, whether it's administration and Paul Schlickman, Zach Dayton, managers such as Abby Passarella, who's here with us on the trip, assistants, trainers. I mean, this team, most of them, they retained 91% of their scoring from last year. This team was in that locker room. They know what it feels like, that loss. They know 33 is the number that's been on there since summer, spring workouts when they started. And, this team has something to prove. And, I will give them better odds than last year. But this team has faced adversity all season. Janelle Brown going down in one of the first games you covered with that ACL injury. How do they respond? They go off. They win that game against a great Villanova squad.
Come back from down 13, I think it was.
Yeah, more specifically, Kenna Magruder, Megan Anderson playing hero ball there. And then what do? They win their first 19 MAC games by another dominant margin. Obviously, that another adversity point, that loss to Quinnipiac, which was a great game, by the way. Quinnipiac just made 1 or 2 more plays than Fairfield did. And give credit where credit is due to Quinnipiac. In my opinion, they should be in the NCAA March Madness tournament. You can't deny what Trisha Fabry, Gower Vive, Anna Foley, and that entire team in Hampton, Connecticut has done all season. And, unfortunately, bracketology and all the decisions that go into that, it is skewed to Power Four teams, and it is a reality. But that's another conversation for another day. But I guess to go back to your overarching question here is that, Fairfield is confidence. This is not a team that is happy to be here. This is a team that expected to be here, one, and two, wants to do something with it. We're not here for the experience, for the social media, all those things. Like we came here to win a basketball game, or games, plural. Like, we want to make a statement here because, there's always a Cinderella. Nobody's going to deny that. And, although the women's may be more so predictable than the men's side, just going off of like last year, the women's, it was Iowa, South Carolina. I think all 1 seeds were in the Final Four, maybe, or it was only one.
I think UConn was a 2, and then outside of that, it was all 1s. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, you see where I'm going. Like, this
Right.
team, they're hungry, and you can see it. The urgency has only picked up, and it's only going to pick up.
I think the other element to this game, when you look at this matchup, you mentioned Janelle Brown's injury. Megan Anderson stepped up. I asked her about it after the Quinnipiac game in Atlantic City. She should have won Player of the Year. Gal's great. I believe Megan Anderson was the best player of the conference. When you look at what she's done on both sides of the ball, the strides she made, in terms of her one-on-one defense, things don't really show up in the box score. She's just such a better player, so much more mature as a player, such a better playmaker, so consistent and reliable. And it feels like Fairfield is at their best when Anderson is at their best. You find a correlation. 2 of their least productive wins of the season, while it kind of sounds like a weird way to word it, in those 2 MAC tournament games between Manhattan and Mount St. Mary's. In both of those games, Megan Anderson was not herself. Then she turned it on. She scored 27 in the championship, and Fairfield had no problems moving past the Bobcats. So I think Anderson is one of the keys to unlocking the window for Fairfield to get through. I spoke with her on Tuesday. Just looking at her, she's confident. Like, obviously, of course, you want to be confident at this stage. What are your thoughts on what Anderson could do schematically when you look at this Kansas State team, but then also just what she's brought to the table and how she wants to use her abilities on a national stage here, especially after the heartbreak she endured last year in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, no, for a freshman who doesn't play like a freshman in her first year, and then to have the type of freshman year she had, to be first team, then to follow that up while still playing complimentary basketball and letting other players shine also, like Katie Lamro, who's taken great strides, second team All-MAC, Selimovic, who has been third team All-MAC. You see Nicolette Leite has grown in the assist game. All of their games are complementing one another. And, the unfortunate reality is we do live in a results-based industry. And the main criteria is obviously points per game. And, looking back at that Fairfield Quinnipiac game, like, I personally think Gower Vive deserved the award, and I don't, not to get into an argument with you, but I think it was fair. I think, I will say, I think the voting was very close. I believe both of them were more likely than not unanimous first team All-MACers. So that was obviously to be expected. But, this team is a next man up mentality type team. Someone's going to have someone's back when they're not producing. When it was Manhattan game, it was Rayanna Brown. When it was the Mount game, and Jill Herder, Jill Herder was absolutely amazing in those first 2 games. When Fairfield was kind of struggling from 3, she kind of gave a spark on the bench, to avoid the offense going from ice cold, But this team always, when they're struggling in something, the team is always making it up in something else. The defense against Mount in that second and third quarters, holding them to 9 points combined. That we don't win that game without that type of defensive stand stretch. And then, obviously when the offense took off, what did they do? Megan Anderson, and give huge credit to Cyan Ko also, who was primarily guarding Gal Raviv in her minutes. They held Gal Raviv to 17 points on 6 of 22 shooting. 17 points is great. Gal Raviv is one of those types of players where you can't hope to completely stop her. You can only hope to contain her.
And they did that.
Yeah, and they did that. You're absolutely right. To have her shoot 22 shots and only make 6 of them, I think, I'm not in that locker room, but I'm probably jumping up and down seeing after like what she did to Iona and then what she did to Merrimack in the semis the game before. So really, Anderson may very well be a leader among this team, and she is well beyond her years, believe me. She does not play like a sophomore at a relatively small mid-major school. She holds her own, and even when she isn't having her best moment, she's always doing something right to keep her in a positive light. That Mount game, I've completely forgot this one. Don't know how this went over my head. That rebound after the Katie Lamro missed free throw. We don't win that game without that happening. That's still more likely than not stays a 1-possession game. And if you eliminate that rebound and keep the 3, we could be still in overtime, or Mount could very well be where we are. So it's the little things, and the result-based industry, it's not everything. Obviously, like you need score points to win a game. You need to force turnovers to stop your opponent. But
yes,
Megan Anderson, I feel like I think she honestly just wants to win, and it doesn't matter how they win. It's just if they win, because now we are in the time of year where it's win in advance. Nothing matters beforehand. You win, you advance. And that type of mentality has gotten Fairfield to where it is, because they could have very easily they were on the ropes in those games versus Manhattan and Quinnipiac. And, you mentioned that aha moment with the game versus Quinnipiac, that this team just finds ways to win again and again. But, the tallest tasks are ahead of them in a formidable Kansas State team.
I think it's interesting, and by the way, all the things you said there are completely true, and Gal was so unbelievable as well. By making the remark about Anderson being player of the year, in my opinion, has nothing to do with the success of Gal or even Nasiara Pryor, who's in the running, despite Sacred Heart not making the tournament.
I still don't know how she didn't make first team All-MAC.
That is criminal. She led the country in steals this year. What a dynamic asset.
Steals. I think she was second in scoring in MAC behind Jana, who averaged 19, had a double-double, by the way. Yep. We don't even talk about that enough and how hard that is to do in today's college basketball landscape. But I'm excited for Sacred Heart. It's good for Connecticut basketball when the 3 teams are doing well and have flashes. Obviously, Sacred Heart didn't make the tournament in Atlantic City, but they gave us 2 phenomenal games and efforts when we played this season. And Pryor, would not be surprised if she stays. She's my favorite for MAC Player of the Year.
I'd completely agree. She's marvelous, especially. If Sacred Heart made Atlantic City or was able to get a high seed, she'd 100% be in the running for Player of the Year. I think there was certainly an element in the All-MAC voting of wanting to reward success, and you saw that on the men's side as well. I think each of the top, if I'm remembering this correctly, the top 4 seeds took up the first team All-MAC on the men's side. So I think there was very much a sense of wanting to reward team success in the individual award landscape, which I'm all for. Now, I don't know if Nasiara Pryor's for it, but that's a different discussion for a different day. I think when you look at this Fairfield team, I forget if it was you or Logan who said it earlier, like they could just shoot the ball at will. I think they're 5th in the country in field goal percentage. They're 3rd in the country in 3-point percentage. We talk about this Fairfield team and what they could do shooting the basketball. And people think that the separator in this matchup is the height and the physicality, which it very well may be. Fairfield has their road runners. I think Brianna Brown's going to be a big key because I think physically she may be the only player who could keep up with Ayoka Lee, if anyone can on this team. I think she would be their best hope of doing that. Obviously, you're going to have to draw up some doubles, and that's why Coach Carly has this job and I don't. But obviously, she'll have a great scheme for her. But I also think there's an element of Lee's going to beat you, stop everyone else. Because I think if Fairfield, as Logan mentioned earlier, if Fairfield's shooting efficiently and they outshoot Kansas State, it's hard to win a basketball game when getting outshot. So maybe the strategy is somewhat like, yeah, try your best on Lee, but like let her get her 20, 22 points, her 10 rebounds, let her have the stat padding day. But at the same time, make sure others are contained on this roster, because this Kansas State team without Lee hasn't been able to do much. Like, we're talking about what this team has been able to do with Lee. Who knows if she's 100%? And who knows how the my point is, can other people on this team beat you? Say, fine, force them to beat you in a sense. I think there are many different ways of looking at it. Do you want to let Lee take the point to try to stop everyone else? How do you do it? Obviously, it's a tough challenge when you're going against that kind of team, but I think there are multiple different routes. If you're Fairfield, obviously, you want to stop everyone. You don't want them to score at all. That's the ideal scenario. But are you more trying to say stop everyone else, or are you saying contain Lee and force Sundell and the other supporting cast members?
Well, this is where coaching becomes a nightmare. And this is why I am not a coach, because we can talk about it as much as we want, but we don't know unless we are truly analyzing this in depth, watching film for everything. And I've watched my fair share of film. I still have not cracked a full code, but it just goes to show how much depth, Kansas State has. And, even without Lee, they were still a 500 team. It's not like they didn't win a single game. They've had Kennedy Taylor step up. This is a great rebounding team, physicality aside from Lee. Just trying to pull up some stats. Kennedy Taylor played great in the Big 12 portion of their schedule since Lee got injured. And, Sundell didn't go anywhere. She was still playing at a very high rate. Poindexter's still making threes for them. So it really is a difficult situation, because it almost feels like a trade-off. Are you going to go to all lengths to stop Lee and chance letting other 40% three-point shooters on this roster get the better of you? Because there's Taryn Sides, who we haven't even mentioned yet. She's shooting 45% from three this season.
Gracious, yeah.
Just unheard of. I think NBA leaders like 38% from three, but they have three players on this roster.
Not to cut you off, that's 8th in the country.
They have three players who shoot over 40% from three. Sides, Jalen Glenn, and Poindexter. And, Fairfield, we talk about, them having the game they had against Quinnipiac, but Kansas State's been doing this all season. If you find the open person on their team, they are going to make you pay. And Fairfield did that in the MAC, but Kansas State has held their own in a very tough Big 12 conference with the likes of TCU, Baylor, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, and more others. I know Iowa State's just beat Princeton in the first four yesterday. So you've got Big 12 is here and is representing very well in March Madness here. So it's a tall task. That's obviously for Fairfield's purposes, though. This is where you look at, you need to have those defensive games like you've had on the mat. You need to contain the three and stop it.
Make this a slower paced game. That's how Fairfield operates. I think that has to be one of the keys too. If you're making a list of key pointers, Fairfield's got to do slow down the pace a little bit, force them to beat you in the final 5 seconds of the shot clock. And again, if 45% 3-point shooters drain it as the shot clock winds down, tip your cap. But that I think the strategy is to make this game slower paced, because that's where Fairfield is most dominant on both sides of the ball.
And I think if Fairfield trying to go toe to toe with a Kansas State, I do not think is the wisest strategy. Fairfield needs to use their speed, but they can't be trying to go three-pointer for three-pointer. They need to play the Fairfield brand basketball. Every player touches the ball. They use all of the shot clock. They play up pace. There's always going to be a double team. Someone's open. And, this is going to be a very interesting game, because, Kansas State, we talk about Mount St. Mary's and their splits they had in Atlantic City. Kansas State has had equally interesting splits, 18-1 with Lee, or 19-1, excuse me. And then they were a 500 team with Lee out. So anytime someone doesn't play for a month or so, it's challenging because you never know what you're going to expect. Because when Lee returned from that injury, she re-aggravated it. I personally
Who
do
knows
not
how
think
she's playing tomorrow? Like, obviously, she's saying she's 100%, but like, is Aoka Lee the dominant Aoka Lee that led Kansas State to being the 9th best team in net rating and like one of the best teams in the country when they're healthy, when she has been healthy? Because yes, you could come back from an injury, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be 100%. And if she's not 100%, speaking of kind of unlocking the window, opening the window to get through, that's one advantage. Obviously, you want to play them at 100%, but you obviously don't know how Aoka's going to play tomorrow, and I think that'll be an interesting storyline to look out for.
And I think in terms of the minutes, like Fairfield's been playing a tournament of runs in Atlantic City. Like they had Manhattan went on that 13-0 run in their first game. Then Fairfield answered right back with a 7-0 run to tie it. And then, the Mount game also was full of runs. Fairfield was up 10 at one point, and then Fairfield survived that game. And then Fairfield just went nuclear from offense in that game against Quinnipiac. So Fairfield, I guess, in this sense, needs to keep it within striking distance at all times. Kansas State, when they start hot, they don't let up. Before you know it, the game could very well be 24-8 or something like that. So at the same time, while Fairfield's offense needs to show up and early, Fairfield's defense needs to do their part and not give up as many points as Kansas State averages per game. And it is a nightmarish situation. Like I will be quite frank, because if, we've said time and time again, but we can't deny it. If Aoka Lee doesn't get hurt, this team is a 2 seed. This team is a 3 seed. This team hosted a regional last year. This is
they should have. I think many people argue they should have done it again, even with Lee being injured. You have to take into account the fact that she is healthy now.
We
so
could
many
very
ways
well
of
be in
looking at
Kansas State right now and Kentucky as the 5 seed. This just goes to show why this draw is not ideal from a Fairfield fans perspective if you want to move on. However, it is what you want in terms of going against the best. And, I think Fairfield, their non-conference strength of schedule does bode them well. And particularly we mentioned that Oklahoma State game where they only lost by 1. Big part of that was they were down 9 at the end of the first quarter in that game. That happened. If that doesn't happen and we keep it maybe within 4 or 5, we maybe win that game. So they need to.
Early in the game, Fairfield can't rely on its resiliency down the stretch. They got to, as I mentioned there, yes, could Fairfield come back? Absolutely. They've done it all season. We mentioned the 13-point comeback against Villanova. You mentioned the comeback there. That's what Fairfield's done so well, but their most dominant games this year have been when they've generated a big lead. Early on. I don't know if you can do that against Kansas State, but you got to keep the separation smaller than you can against other teams, because Kansas State, a national championship contender, is going to make you pay. Kind of along that point, Fairfield Frank, a diehard Fairfield fan, mentioned on Twitter, Kansas State lost at Oklahoma State by 30 in February. It was without Aoka Lee, which is obviously a key component, but still that's a tough loss. While the Stags lost to Oklahoma State by 2 on the road in November. I think that has to go into account. And also, Andrew, maybe you could touch on this really quick before we kind of head into predictions and we wrap this up. Kansas State has lost 3 of their last 4 and 4 of their last 6. Whether you blame that on Lee's injury or not, being a cold basketball team is never a recipe for success. And you look at the score, and offensively they've been there, but you look at their past 5 games, what they've done on the defensive side of the ball, and I think it leaves a lot to be desired. So is there something that Fairfield can exploit? And I think that that's going to be the golden question as Coach Carly and this group prepares for tomorrow at 2:30.
Yeah, I think, it's got to be a complete team effort. This is going to be a fast-paced game. Kansas State likes to play fast. Fairfield likes to play fast. Fairfield's going to need to go to their bench and get quality minutes from Cyan Coe, Rayana Brown, Jill Hurd, who have all had great stints in Atlantic City and throughout this season. Rayana Brown is a starter on most other MAC teams, as she won 6th player of the year
in the MAC. Yeah.
But she just wants to win. And Fairfield is a winning culture. And Fairfield is going to it's going to be a complete team effort, and this is going to be a game won in the trenches if you're Fairfield. You're not going to get Sydney Scott shooting 6 of 6 more likely than not, but you're going to need her stepping up and maybe putting up double digits. And, I don't want to say this to be too critical, but 3 of 25, if you shoot that from 3 like they did against the Mount, this game is going to maybe be over by second quarter, early third. So it really does come down to, consistency on offense, making sure playing smart, not doing anything else needed. Like you can't turn the ball over 20 plus times. And Fairfield, I think, averages 13 per game as of right now. Kansas State is averaging 13 themselves, so maybe Fairfield's closer to 14. But it really is going to be a fascinating game to watch from our perspective because there's so many storylines that one, what is Lee going to look like? 2, Fairfield,
How are they going to shoot?
How are they going to shoot? And 3, does the defense that we've seen, one of the top 10 in the country, carry over against the top 5 offense in NCAA college women's basketball?
That will be the question. Look, I was talking to Megan about this. It's kind of funny. It's a reverse roles. Everyone's talked about how the target has been on Fairfield's back in the MAC tournament. It kind of reminds me of like Fairfield was almost competing, and there's no disrespect to the MAC, but just in terms of like what happens when you elevate. Like a kid goes through 4 years of high school and they're the hot thing on the block when they're a senior, and then you go down and now you're just the little kid in a big group of just strong, powerful people in college. And it's anything when you go to a new level. And Fairfield no longer has that target on their back. They're now a 17.5-point underdog, which I believe is too large. I don't think Fairfield's going to lose this game in that magnitude. I think they're going to keep it close. Yeah. So
one more thing just really quickly.
Yeah, go.
Katie and Megan in particular have progressed tremendously.
Of course. I love Katie's physicality. Did you see her the other flying all over the place? I mean, she's unbelievable.
They just want it more than last year. And, Kate, whether it's Katie diving on that ball or Megan grabbing a rebound, I firmly believe they're going to have better games than they did against Indiana. And, but that's more likely than not going to be needed.
Andrew, you're right. Real quick, can you predict the game? I think you're calling it, so you can't give a prediction, correct?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to give my piece here from a broadcaster's perspective. I am just going to hope for a competitive game from start to finish where both teams leave it all on the court and, the fan gets their money's worth.
Real quick before we wrap up, you've been covering this Fairfield team all season. You're a student at Fairfield University covering this team, and now you're here and you're seeing what this would mean for them to win. What would this mean for Coach Carly, for these players, for the staff, for this organization, for this program, and for this university if they were to get a win in the NCAA tournament, which if I'm correct here, I think would be their first in program history?
It absolutely would be, and it would signal that Fairfield is here. Fairfield is here. We are in the thick of it with some of your more popular Power 4 teams. We have an elite culture. I'll say one of the best in the country. Coach Carly is as loyal as any coaches they've come. We've seen reports. I know you might have seen them too about
Missouri,
Wisconsin, Auburn, Missouri. Carly said, "I'm here. I'm staying here. And I'm going to do what I said I would do, and that is build Fairfield into a national powerhouse." And we've seen glimpses of it. Top 25 ranking, undefeated MAC record. There's one thing we haven't done, though, and that is an NCAA tournament win. No better time to do it than the present, and it would only add to a further statement that, hey, mid-major basketball is here, and UConn's not the only elite Connecticut school for basketball. There are a lot of teams in Connecticut that are elite at the moment. Quinnipiac, Fairfield. I'll give UConn their credit where credit is due. They have been unbelievable for what they've done in my lifetime. But hey, the Stags are here, and we're going to compete with the best of them, and we're going to start bringing wins, and you should run with us or run from us.
That's what Nellie Brown was screaming after they won. Run from us or run with us. She was literally screaming that as Fairfield won. Andrew, we wish you the best of luck. For Logan as well. Obviously, we'll be riding with him afterwards if you see him. Just thank him so much as well. We really appreciate you guys coming on. Obviously, we've been trying to coordinate this, and we know you guys are so busy getting ready to call this game tomorrow on WVOF Sports. Please be sure to check them out for the audience that is watching on YouTube. Andrew, we really appreciate it. I'll be tuning into the stream, obviously, and we wish you the best of luck as you're going to call, hopefully not your final Fairfield game of the season. Obviously, I'm going to stay unbiased here, but as someone who's been covering this Fairfield team, it would be great to see these people who I've been covering all year, to see them win. It would be just a monumental position for this program. So we wish you the best of luck on this endeavor and on the call tomorrow.
I appreciate the time, Chase, and the basketball gods will reward those who put in the time, work, and effort, and Fairfield has done that. So with that, go Stags. Thank you, Chase. I will see you soon.
Yes, man, you're the best. We're going to sign off here.
Well.
Thank you so much to the audience for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. We're going to have some more coverage. Stay tuned for an interview with Megan Anderson and an article about how Megan, Andrew, and some others are feeling ahead of this Fairfield team. You guys are going to see that. I'll tag all of them, and you guys will see some more Fairfield University Stags coverage as we head up to that game against Kansas State, at 2:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on ESPN News. Andrew, thanks so much. We'll sign off here. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long. Stagnation, signing off. Huge game against Kansas State tomorrow. More NCAA women's coverage to come right here on Chaser Sports News.
Go Stags.